Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for Kedma.
Woo! Well, good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. I'm from Oregon. So stand up if you have received funds from a bank and you're an inventor. All right, let's reverse that. How many people here have come from the invention world, have tried to go to a bank, and have been denied? Anybody? So the rest of us have received funding. So let's ask the third question. How many people here have applied for any kind of funding and had no problem receiving it? You did. All right, right over here, one person. So one of the things I want to share, my name is Kedma Ough, is I have spent the last 18 years, and all I do is help find funds, grants, and resources, primarily for people who are not bankable. Usually when you're starting in the inventor world, you have an idea, and the next thing you want to do is you want to get funded. But you run into a lot of issues. Now, I love my banks. I come from the SBA world. I ran the Women's Business Centers. I just came off supporting the SBDC. But 18 years ago, if you and I were on a journey, you would have found me in Tucson, Arizona, and I had just filed bankruptcy. Most of the time when people go to that level and make the decision to file, it has nothing to do with their knowledge in finance. It has everything to do with a crisis that has happened, a job crisis, a health crisis, or a divorce. In most cases, that is what happens with women. They have to file a divorce, they file bankruptcy, and they realize everything that they had is tied to their credit. So there I was, sobbing my eyes out, having made that difficult choice, and 2 weeks later, I remember walking back to my apartment, and I received an envelope from Capital One credit card. Anybody use Capital One credit card right now? Yeah, thank you. Because here's what happened. I received the envelope, I opened it up, and it said, "Congratulations, we're giving you a $200 credit card." Now, $200 doesn't sound like a lot of money, right? Except, let me tell you where my mind was. I remembered that when I was a little girl, every single summer for years and years and years, I used to play a game called Monopoly. And when you play a game called Monopoly, you get to go around the board and pass go. And how much money do you get? Exactly. So the universe basically brought me back into the game. And then I said, what if I go on a journey to uncover every fund, every resource, every grant for people in my situation? And that took me on a 15-year journey. So for 15 years, I literally spent my time understanding the cycle of funding, understanding how do we get grants, understanding how can we target it so that ideas don't end up in a cemetery, they end up in commercialization. And then it took us 3 years to write our book. So Target Funding is now through McGraw-Hill, and I have over 300 resources. And today, I'm going to tell you all my secrets. So for the next 45 minutes, we're going to go on a journey. I have this thing I tell my clients. If I would have told you 18 years ago that I would go on your behalf on a funding journey to uncover all the secrets, and all you would have to pay me is $2 a year, and 18 years later, I'd come back and I'd collect $36 from you and tell you everything I know. How many people would bet on me? How many people would do that, right? So it's really important that when we listen today to these amazing people that I'm privileged to be a part of, that we not just listen, we take action. We follow the book. We actually buy something or read something and implement it. Because if we don't implement information, nothing happens. I don't know how many people here would have taken a $200 credit card and then gone on a 15-year journey, right? That you'd have to be mad. That's why I'm an inventor, right? I have a different mindset. I think differently. So let me begin. This is me. I had to do this really quickly so you could see, what gives me the right to call myself a champion? Because that's a very difficult place to call yourself. You don't want to be narcissistic. But the idea of being a champion is to be a superhero, to have a voice for people who don't have voices, to fight for capital when it's difficult to do it. And most of my journey in the last 20 years has been in every single sector you can imagine, supporting and representing community. I consult currently for the Veterans Administration, helping service-disabled vets get the grants they need. I consult for Voc Rehab, helping people with disabilities, Commission for the Blind. I worked at the Women's Business Center. I just left after 5 years as the State Innovation Director for the Small Business Development Centers in Oregon. I was also co-author for Indianpreneurship, helping Native Americans. When you are involved year after year in so many different areas, you get to see the pain, but you also get to see how to support them. I'm also a board member for the United Inventors Association, and I've spent my career helping inventors figure out how to take their product to market, but get the funding they need before they go broke. We don't want you going broke. We don't want you using your house as collateral if it's not necessary. So here's what I learned and I want to share with you. Most people, when they think about funding, they think about one funding source. I'm going to go to one loan. I'm going to go to only SBA. I'm going to do one crowdfunding. If I told you tomorrow that we're going to take $100,000 and we're going to go to your financial planner and say, can you put this all in one stock? What would your financial planner say? Madness, right? Because a financial planner knows that the key to increasing your wealth is diversification of the funds. We have to shift our mindset and realize that diversification of target funding helps you be successful. So if we took money as a pizza pie, we want to have 12 slices of funds. And if you were asking for $100,000, I want you to think about 12 resources you can get that money instead of one resource. So what I want to do, I have my wonderful assistant Brian here. I'm going to have him quickly pass around green cards. I want you to just, as I'm going through my presentation, write down any question you have. Any question you have, give me your name, because if I love the question, two things. One is I'm going to give you my business cards, which is actually real poker chips. You can hear them. I had them custom made because I think funding is gambling and I want you to gamble right. And also, if I read your question on stage, I may bring you up. Don't be intimidated. It's okay. I know that public speaking is, I think, according to America's statistics, it's the #1 feared and death is second, so I appreciate that. But it's really to make sure that we get the questions answered, and I'll also make a commitment to speak to you offline and see what we can do to support you. So answering the questions is really important for me because this allows me to be directly connected to you in the audience and directly see if I can answer your question. So if you're going through a struggle right now, you're trying to figure out, I have an idea, and where do I go from here? Who do I talk to? How do I get funds? How do I find grants? Put that down, because I bet you 10 other people in this room are thinking the same exact thing, but maybe they don't have the courage to share it. So here's how I crack the code on target funding. And as you go around, Brian will collect it, so just take a few minutes. One of the things I want to teach everyone here is that to crack the code on funding, you have to understand terminology. If you've gone through the patent search process before, you know that in order to even start the patent search process, you have to have the right terminology. If you work with any patent search firm, or any patent agent, or any patent attorney, they would tell you that. If you go to the US Patent Office patent search database, or whether it's Google Patents, or another site I love, it's freepatentsonline.com. If you don't know about it, please take it down, freepatentsonline.com. The reason I love it so much is when I key in the terminology, it will tell me from 0 to 1,000, so 1,000 is the highest, the closest patent to that terminology. So really, very quickly, I can start sourcing and sorting where patents are based on my keyword, just using that website. So when we think about grant terminology, I want you to realize that a grant in my mind is any time you don't have to pay full dollar for the service that would have cost you out in the commercial sector. So if I was working with an attorney who charges $500 an hour, and you came to me and said, well, wait a minute, I need to have this reviewed, and I was able to get you through a program or a clinic or pro bono program, and at the same quality level, you only paid $25, the difference of that is the grant you received. Does that make sense? So here are just some terms to think about. I'm just going to throw these out and we'll talk about it. So grants could be in the term of a match savings, pro bono, forgivable loan, SBIR, STTR. Show of hands if anybody has heard of what a forgivable loan is. Okay, a few of you. A forgivable loan is written like a loan, it's stated like a loan, and they will tell you it's a loan. But as long as you agree to X, Y, and Z and commit to X, Y, and Z, then the loan is forgiven and you receive it as a grant. So I had that happen about 10 years ago, where when I was running a program helping inventors go from ideation to commercialization, I decided to become a parent, and then I became a parent again, and then I became a parent again. So after 3 kids, what you need to know is it's very expensive to do daycare, right? It's like, wait a minute, what do you mean $1,000 for my kid? I mean, I know he's worth more, but, you know, can we negotiate here? Maybe it's like $300. No, right? Daycare is very expensive, so I started my own daycare on top of everything else, and I received a forgivable loan to hire people to run my daycare. And as long as I showed 6 months of payroll, that money was given to me. Show of hands if you finished your little card so we can just collect it. Okay, Brian, can you walk around and just grab that and then bring it back to me? Okay, variables are gold. I'm going to walk through all the variables, how I figured out and cracked the code. By the way, you are not my first rodeo. I have proven my system to more than 10,000 entrepreneurs and inventors. And so I spend my career traveling around the country teaching people the method, because if I can teach you how to find the money, then you're going to be more successful, there'll be more jobs created, and America is going to be stronger in innovation. The reality is there's millions and millions of dollars available, but if you don't have a navigator, if you don't have an Uber driver going down the highway, you're going to have a hard time figuring out how to go there. First thing I want you to know is there's money always tied to the stage of your idea. If you say to yourself, well, I'm in research and development, and you're thinking about new technology, I may say to you, we want to maybe look at SBIR, STTR. Has anybody received a phase 1 or phase 2, both, from SBIR, Small Business Innovation? Excellent, thank you. Can you stand up? What's your name? Yes, can you tell us, talk a little loud, what you received it for?
I received... Hold on just a second.
Yep, we're going to get a mic, thank you.
So my company is a scientific instrument company, and we receive SBIR and from DOE and NSF for our R&D. So we're still in the prototype and the feasibility test stage.
And you're in phase 1? Thank you, thank you. So give her a round of applause on that. Thank you. I'm just going to run out here. You're like, wait a minute, what is this speaker doing? I'm going to hand you my poker chips so that you can connect with me later.
Oh, thank you.
So SBIR, for people who don't know, I'll quickly talk about it and we'll move on. Small Business Innovation Research. I managed it actually in Oregon, and there is actually programs tied if you are in the gap. Financing for phase 1 is to look at economic development and see, can they help you between phase 1 and phase 2? Because a lot of times economic development agencies in your city are going to look at how we can help those organizations. Technically, it's anywhere between 100 to 150,000 for the first part of that phase. It could be a little bit less, and there's about 11 agencies that participate. She mentioned DOE, National Science Foundation. There's also Department of Defense. Well, what I want you to do today is I want you to go later on to sbir.gov, and I want you to look at it. You would be really shocked at what kind of proposals come out of SBIR. I have seen everything from looking at new technology for uniform for the military, to how do we develop gaming, technology gaming, to support new ways of communicating for people who are on the autism spectrum, right? So it runs the gamut. And so what I love about the SBIR program is it's one of the largest funding programs that the government provides, and it's non-dilutive funds. You don't have to repay it back, and the government does not take a position on your IP. Now, that doesn't mean the university won't. That's STTR, and I'm not part of that. I love working with universities, but if you end up working with a university, they may negotiate a position on your IP. That is my point on stage of idea, is to think about research and development. Okay, if I'm in a startup, then I may have different funding. So what I want you to know today is that's one of the variables you want to write down, because there's funding tied to that. The second area that we tie funding to is your location. Every time I go to a new city, I spend about a couple of hours looking at all the funds that I call them hidden funds, because most of the organizations are not actively promoting it. I think that banks have done an incredible job in branding. They spend millions and millions of dollars communicating that they are the #1 place for funding, but not often for inventors. Not the first place for inventors. Because unless you can do that proof of concept and show commercialization and show sales, you may have a really hard time backing up what they may be looking for. So looking within your community is an excellent way to see how you can support funding for your business. I think, Brian, are you collecting them, I think? Yep, somewhere? So then we can, yeah, if you can collect more of the cards, then we can grab them. The third area is product industry. So I spend a lot of time here as well. So I want you to think about your business, but I want you to think about your business not only in the industry you're thinking about, but can it go into a different industry? Let me give you a quick story. A few years ago, I was working with a woman who had a dream that she wanted to sell an apparatus to the airline industry. She knew that the airline industry was going to buy it. You see, she had a problem nodding. Every time she was on an airplane, she would constantly nod, and her neck would go back and go forward, and she was embarrassed. And also, she didn't feel like there was a way to sort of constrain it. So she created a sort of a bandana, but the bandana had to go behind someone's seat. So you had to say, "Excuse me, can I put my bandana behind your seat so I can hold my head back?" And she thought that the airline company would buy this for millions. Do you think the airline companies did this? Of course not. So instead of saying no to her, I said, let's review your broad patent and let's see, can we get you into a different industry? So we started thinking out of the box. Could this work in the food, farmers, for example? I don't know. Could it work in technology? I don't know. Could it work in healthcare? I don't know. Well, we hit the jackpot because I introduced her to a woman who actually worked in the home services industry and nursing homes. She took one look at the product and she said, "Oh my goodness, we need this. We need this, we need this, we need this." I said, "What do you need?" "We need this apparatus." I said, "Why?" She said, "You don't understand. We work every single day with paraplegics. And our nurses care for our patients, but the problem is when it's feeding time, the nurses have to use one hand to hold the patient's head and the other hand to feed the patient. And if we get this solution, we're going to give dignity back to the patient and give the nurse an opportunity to use both hands." And she received a licensing deal through Alamed. That is an example where you have to look at your business in a different way and say, maybe the product has to go somewhere else. Okay, variables. I'm going to walk through this quickly so I can answer your questions. There is money hidden if you're a female business owner. So we'll talk about some examples. If you are in the LGBTQ community, I work very closely with the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. They offer grants for businesses. If you're not part of the program, I highly suggest you connect with the Chamber of Commerce. They're very focused on supporting businesses, and they have grants set aside to support their mission. There's a lot of funds for ethnicity, Hispanic, African American, Native American. The problem is we don't think that way. We don't think, well, You know, if I'm African American, can I key in African American, Washington, D.C. and funding and see if there's funds out there? So we're going to show some examples. And then lastly, there's veterans. So how many people have served their country here? First of all, thank you for serving your country. And I want you to know that not only am I a consultant for the VA, but I have helped the veteran community get grants upon grants upon grants, because my philosophy is if the government has it available and you've served your country, you have a right to know about it. You have a right to receive it. So, but it's not easy unless you have a navigator supporting you. There's also funds for disabled, so we'll talk a little bit about that and how you can tap into that. And then social impact. I want you to think about going after money that has a social impact. Not, I have an invention, but who is the invention serving? Is it serving to change lives? Is it serving to save lives? Is it serving a specific population that by introducing it, it's going to change how they do things? One of my favorite inventions came from a gentleman who was a physician at an ER, and he kept watching these beautiful young kids, 2 years and younger, coming into the ER with burns on their hands. He couldn't figure out why the burns were happening and started realizing they were chemical burns. The chemical burns were coming from the parents and the housekeepers that were using these harsh chemicals to get rid of the nasty hair in the bathtubs. And the kids who didn't know, or maybe they weren't properly cleaned, would go in there and they'd get these chemical burns. And he said, I don't want to have another child walking through my ER with that same situation. And so he developed a product, Dynamic Drain, now called Everclear Drain, that literally eliminates the hair using a system where there are blades built into a plug that you replace with your current one, and you press it 2 or 3 times in the morning, and it cuts through the hair, no chemicals needed. That product first went onto QVC, and from there got picked up by Home Depot, and now has all over the country. But it began with, how can I solve a medical problem that was happening in my community? All right, I'm going to pause right now. How am I doing on time, Sean?
You have 15 minutes remaining.
Woo! Okay, good. I'm going to pause. This is a circle, and if you're interested in getting my PowerPoint, let me know. Happy to do it offline. I can send it to you. This is the 20 different target variables I focus on. I know it's hard to read, but I focus on everything from looking at innovation dollars to community dollars, angel investors. But then I think out of the box. I also look at competition funding. I look at funding outside of crowdfunding. I look at a lot of grants tied to economic development. So I am going to go ahead and go through some of these questions and see if we can solve some of the answers happening in this room today. First one, I am a disabled vet. I have ideas to make the wheelchair experience at the, forgive me if I don't know the handwriting that well. The VA. Okay, thank you. Experience better. But the VA is a bureaucracy. How do I get through it? Woo! Anybody here representing the VA right now? Okay, because I would tell you to leave the room. Because one thing you'll learn from me, born in the Bronx, I tell it like it is. I do. I tell it like it is, because otherwise you can't be a champion if you're on stage and you haven't been through the real deal. I'm not going to disagree. The VA is a bureaucracy. One of my favorite cases was a case where I helped someone go through feasibility and get through the whole process that they require for funding, and then the VA denied them. They denied them. Now, most people would walk away, but I don't do that. So I turned around and I said to the client, I'm going to represent you pro bono until it takes what it takes. And it took 7 years. I gave birth to 2 kids. That's right. I got a congressman involved, and I got someone fired, and 7 years later, we won our case. Thank you. Thank you. So now, in all credit to the VA, it's really not their fault. In some ways it is, some ways it's not. One of the reasons the bureaucracy is in place is because the pendulum has changed. In the past, there was a lot of funding set aside for grants, up to $100,000. Counselors who are working with service-disabled vets were working with sometimes advisors or consultants who were not doing things the right way, and then an audit came in. And an audit comes in, and when you find out, I'm not saying it happened, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but if you find out that someone used $100,000 to buy a really nice car, and they're like, well, why'd you buy the car? Well, I needed a car. But did you need an $80,000 car? Well, I needed a car. Then, obviously, the hammer comes down, and they move all the way to the other side. So for the person who asked that, I would say, come talk to me offline. A couple of things I would want you to look at. Number one, as a service-disabled vet, there are grants set aside on the local level, $25,000. If you go to my book, there's a chapter right on there. Got it, 10 minutes. I'm being told 10 minutes. Hold me accountable. There's a chapter in my book, $25,000 on the local level. I would check first on what funding you can get. The second thing I would do is I would connect you with a university. I want you to look at a university that supports assistive technology and see how you can connect with them. And then I would absolutely look at SBIR, STTR, and see if there are any kind of topics there of interest that can support that community. Does that help? Yes, all right, thank you. All right, let me go through a few of these so I can do 10 minutes, and I want to show some examples. Woo, I used my own funding to get patents. Anybody had that experience before? Woo, not so good. We want to hopefully stop that. That's why I love the U.S. Patent Pro Bono program so much, and I also work a lot with communities that have small business legal clinics. Legal clinics where the committed IP attorneys are giving back. California Art of Lawyers works with the U.S. Patent Pro Bono program. I do a lot of work with them. All right, I have 5 patents. I'm about to start the process for getting federal grants. How do I get the funding to develop the product for mass market? So I would have to talk to this person online. I'd have to understand their patents. I'd have to understand why you're going manufacturing and you're not looking at licensing. I'd also have to look at proof of concept, and then I would think about maybe having you first connect with the universities to see how you can align with product development there before you move right into the federal grant. So one of the things you have to think about with target funding is when do you need the money and who can give it to you at what time, so that you are constantly working on a funding calendar instead of saying, I need all the money right now. Are there deadlines for applying for grants? Absolutely, 1,000%, of course there is. And so one of the things I want to show you is one of my favorite, Prosper Portland. They came out with a grant in 2018. Here were the variables. You had to be in Portland. You had to be a startup. You had to be looking at working capital. These grants were $30,000, and you could do repetitive over 5 years. You had to be considered minority. In particular, they preferred African American. And you had to be in the cannabis business. That was it. Hey, that was it. People say, well, you know, I don't support cannabis. It doesn't matter whether you support it or not. That was the funding requirement. So that's what they required. And the people who knew about it got into it, and the people who didn't know about it didn't get into it. That's an example of very, very targeted funding. Street chairs for the veterans. I want you to go online. Veteran funding. This organization, all they do is support veterans for funding. Camelback Venture Fellowship. This is an early stage for minorities only. If you are a minority, you're looking at business, and you get into their program. It's a national program looking at minority support. They start you with seed money of $40,000. And they do wraparound support to help you raise it. So I'm just showing you some examples. Accelerate is a women's-driven funding program. I brought a woman there because she tried to get a product on crowdfunding Kickstarter, failed miserably. We put her into this program. 90 days later, she raised $70,000 on Kickstarter. The only difference was that she had an entire women's organization backing her up as she did the program. All right, I'll do one more question, and then I want to leave you guys with a gift. Should I wait until I get patent awarded before I seek funding? What do you think I'm going to say? No! Did I not tell you millions of dollars is there? Absolutely not. What funding sources are less likely to push me away from my values? Ooh, that's a really tight one. I can't speak because I don't know what your values are, but you know what? I've had a love-hate relationship with my bankers because usually they want to work with me once I have all my money, all my collateral, all my setup, And so that's really hard. So I would say the value comes for me when people believe in me before I believe in myself. Those are the people you want to really be behind because they're going to be your champions. So I want to conclude with this. All I did today was give you a small snippet of what's possible. I could spend an entire day going through all those cards and answering all those questions and getting you really a game plan on how to find funds. But what I want to do is this. If you want to hear more, I want to make myself available to you. You could find me on KedmaOugh.com. If you find another Kedma in the world, please run. I think there's only one of me in the world, KedmaOugh, or targetfunding.com. If you tell me that you heard me here at the U.S. Patent Office, and Sean's going to hold me accountable, I will invite you to a free, no-cost class online so you can learn more from me. It doesn't help me to have the information available just in my head or in a book and nobody using it. It helps me when success stories happen and you pick up the phone and you say, Kedma, I heard what you said, I went for an application and I received $10,000. That is why I do what I do. Because I will never forget the moment I got that $200 credit card, and in my mind, if you start playing with me, we're all playing on the Monopoly game. Make sense? Thank you, guys.